When we think about the most hated drivers in Formula 1, usually it's drivers on two opposite ends of the spectrum. Either it's the most successful drivers like Lewis and Max, because with success and popularity also comes a lot of hate, or on the other end of the spectrum, it's the worst drivers on the grid like a Stroll or Latifi type, because people don't feel as though they deserve to be where they are. In the case of Esteban Ocon, however, he manages to occupy this really niche space of being one of the most hated drivers on the grid, whilst also being one of the most average drivers on the grid as well. It's fair to say that during 2024 there was absolutely no love lost between Ocon and Alpine. From the start of the season, it was very clear that Ocon was on his way out, and even as early as Monaco, let's not forget, there were rumours of him being replaced mid-season by Doohan. It's crazy to think that despite the fact that Ocon is the most experienced Renault/Alpine driver of the modern era with the most wins, podiums, points and races for the team, the two of them couldn't wait to get rid of each other, and in the end Ocon jumped at the chance to have his contract ended early in exchange for being able to drive the Haas in the post-season test. Even when the team posted a throwback photo to their double podium in Sao Paulo, they specifically decided to cut Ocon out of the picture, despite the fact that he was the one who finished ahead of Pierre in second place. Ocon and Alpine were almost like the perfect combination, and I don't mean just because they're French. Both of them were just as destructively chaotic as each other, and given that drivers leaving Alpine never tend to leave on the best of terms, in hindsight the way that partnership ended shouldn't really surprise anyone. In the end, I totally understand why Ocon wanted to leave Alpine, because outside of Sao Paulo, this team was a shambles in 2024, and the fact that one result meant that they jumped RB and Haas in the constructors is actually an injustice to how bad they really were. However, that's not to say that Ocon also didn't play his part, because throughout his career, Ocon has always been a very spiky character, and when things do go wrong, he is not the type of person to diffuse a tense situation, he is the type of person to make it worse. Ocon has a long history of teammate relationships going sour, which has manifested into on-track incidents, and whilst it's important to say that not all of them have been his fault, at some point you have to state the obvious that it's not just a coincidence, it's a pattern. Funnily enough, with Gasly, the relationship was already broken before they even got into Formula 1, and so in a way Esteban was almost 5 steps ahead of everyone on that one. But from Perez to Alonso and now to Gasly, there has been crashes, there has been tense wheel-to-wheel battles, and radio squabbles with every single one of them. The reason why Ocon has had all of these contentious relationships with teams and drivers is his character. And now, in a way, I have always been a little bit hesitant to say that this is entirely a bad thing, because let's not forget that his character, which encompasses all of the good and bad things about him as a person, is partly the reason why he got into Formula 1 in the first place. Since Ocon came into F1, he has always felt like a driver who operates almost entirely out of paranoia. One of the reasons for this is that compared to almost every single other driver on the grid, he grew up a lot less privileged than most, and that definitely builds a different type of character. Very few midfield drivers race their teammates as hard as Esteban Ocon does, and it stems from that feeling of both paranoia that at any time he might lose his seat, and also from being insecure that he doesn't get the respect that he feels he deserves. There's definitely a trade-off that throughout his career, I don't think Ocon has judged right. Of course you want to be your teammate, of course you want to make yourself indispensable, and of course you want to be the team leader. But for Ocon, that has definitely come at the cost of now having a reputation as a bad teammate, and a driver who too often has put his own ambitions ahead of the team's at the expense of taking unnecessary risks with his teammates. The irony, of course, is that Ocon knows exactly what it feels like to have his seat snatched away from him, because that is exactly what happened to him. And no one knows better than him the feeling of flying in your second season and looking like the next big thing in Formula 1, and then the next moment being unjustifiably kicked out of the sport. This is exactly what happened to him for 2019, as he was unfortunately the collateral damage in Lawrence Stroll's takeover of Racing Point. After buying the team, Lawrence inserted his son Lance into Esteban's seat, despite not deserving it on any level compared to Ocon, and that is a seat that he still holds to this day at Aston Martin. When Ocon came back to F1 in 2020 with Renault, it felt like an injustice that had been set right. he returned with not only the moral high ground, but also with a lot of goodwill from the fans as well, because this was a talented young driver who didn't deserve to lose his seat to the Stroll empire in the first place, that was back where he belonged. I can't shake the feeling that that whole experience only reaffirmed in Ocon's mind that not only does he need to stay operating with that feeling of paranoia, but actually that he needs to double down. And that, I think, is what's led to everything that has happened since at Alpine. Another factor that I never hear people mention is the teammates that he has been up against. He has had to compete with Perez, Ricciardo, Alonso and Gasly, all of whom I'd argue were in their peak at the point that Ocon was teammates with them. That is a seriously strong level of competition in the same car, and apart from 2020 up against Ricciardo, Ocon has been more than competitive up against every single one of them. That level of competition throughout his career has created almost the perfect storm. It's no coincidence that he always finds himself fighting for the same piece of tarmac as his teammates, and that, along with his mentality, is why he gets into more incidents with them than most. Over the past few years, I wouldn't say that Esteban Ocon has been involved in loads of egregious incidents that are all completely his fault, but it's more so the environment that he has created with his teammates and the reputation that he has created for himself. And no one is saying that you can't stand your ground and race your teammate, but you always have to give your teammate more space and more respect than any other driver, because let's not forget, you are racing for the same team. In wheel-to-wheel combat, Ocon set the tone early with Fernando Alonso, giving him absolutely no quarter, and from there, their relationship only got worse and worse because there was never ever a feeling that these two were actually even teammates. Fernando is actually a really interesting counterpoint because, let's get one thing clear, throughout his career he also has not been the perfect teammate, because as much as I love him as a driver, if you know anything about his history then you will know that he is more than capable of playing tricks within the team. But having said that, compared to Ocon, the difference with Fernando is that on track, it never felt like he lost any respect for his teammates, whilst with Ocon, it feels like that respect with his teammate is never there in the first place. In terms of his time with Gasly, because there was no relationship from both sides to begin with, there was no surprise to see them crash with each other as much as they did. In fairness though, despite the on-track incidents, it feels like the bigger breakdown in relationship during the last 2 years hasn't been with Gasly on track, but with Alpine off track. Too many times, both of the drivers have been massively critical towards the team over team radio, and along with the tension between the drivers, it all just combines to create a really bad dynamic within the team. Ocon is a driver who epitomizes the saying that you can't judge a book by its cover, because as a person outside of the car, he seems like one of the calmest and nicest people in Formula 1. He is also someone who doesn't have or want to have a massive social media presence, and whilst all of that should make him a more likable and relatable person to the fans, in reality it is a stark contrast to the type of driver that he is when his helmet is on. And now, this is nothing new for anyone who's watched any form of motorsport or competed in motorsport themselves. Once that visor goes down, ambition, competitiveness, ego, adrenaline, it all takes over. And the challenge is to harness those emotions in the right way to make you competitive without allowing them to cloud your judgment. And now Ocon defenders will say that that narrative around Esteban is not only unfair but also massively overblown, given that essentially people are criticizing him for racing hard. But the fact is, regardless of what people like me or even fans say on social media, within F1 with the people that actually matter, Ocon does now have a reputation as a bad teammate. If you look at it on paper, he is more than good enough to be a consideration by the top teams for a number 2 driver role alongside a championship caliber talent like a Norris, Russell or Leclerc. The problem is that given the reputation that he has built, top teams just don't see the risk versus reward in hiring him, with the risk being that he unsettles the team environment. When you race at the front, there is even more pressure, there is even more scrutiny on everything that you do, and it's just not an environment that the top teams think is suited for Esteban Ocon. For 2025, he has made a sideways move to Haas alongside Ollie Behrman, and once again I think Ocon's going to be very alert to the fact that there is a lot of hype behind Behrman, and in his mind, he will need to not only assert his authority early within the team, but also crush Behrman on track to make sure that he doesn't become a threat. I don't see Esteban Ocon changing his mentality whatsoever, and if Behrman is quick enough to be on Ocon's level, then there is a lot of evidence to suggest that we're going to see a lot of fireworks. That is just the dynamic that Esteban creates within a team. That ultra competitiveness normally means that each driver is getting the best out of each other, which is why his teams have been so successful throughout his career, but the price you pay for that almost always is inevitable toxicity within the team. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.